Welcome back to the MicroAdvice Podcast. Thus far in the podcast, we focused on customer experience for business software and tools. However, given that software spans so many different industries, I want to highlight the strong customer experience practices from a different perspective, the music industry. To learn about how audio technologies that are used by very well-known artists, DJs, and producers provide a strong end-user experience, we're Morgan Pottruff. Morgan currently serves as a sales and customer success leader for Encore Event Technologies. Additionally, as a lifelong musician and longtime freelance consultant, he runs his own consulting firm, Two Lions Audio, whereby he creates and delivers training content for audio technologies. Morgan, thanks so much for taking the time to be with us today.
Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure to speak with you. Honestly, this is a topic near and dear to my heart, and I think it's going to be pretty exciting for both me and the listeners. So Morgan, when you and I last spoke, we had discussed the importance of software loyalty in the music production community, as well as workflow and adoption.
Right.
I think our listeners would greatly benefit from hearing your insight on each of these different topics.
For sure. Because, you hear a lot in the SaaS world that people are switching applications really quickly and turning left, right,
Right.
back and forth. And so that's a challenge. So yeah, music software is a little bit different because people are very personally invested in the software that they use. So imagine like I'm 17 years old and I decide that, hey, you know what? I want to be deadmau5 one day. Like it looks really cool. Maybe I want my own cube. I want my own LED hat. And I'm thinking, okay, well, I'm going to go get a piece of software and I'm going to go make a track and I upload it to SoundCloud and my mom liked it and my best friend likes it. And I realized, oh, snap, like I'm going to now have to go a lot further than I thought to catch up to deadmau5, right? In fact, I'm pretty sure I'm going to have to put my 10,000 hours in, right?
That's right.
To be that. Like there's no, I'm realizing right then and there, there's no shortcut. So I know that I have this long journey ahead of me to learn. So a lot of people in that situation, believe me, there's armies of young kids starting now, maybe age 13 and up, who are starting on that journey. And sometimes that 23-year-old producer that you see on EDM stage has actually been cracking away at it for 10 years. Like you wouldn't think it, but they have. And they put that time in. So understandably, they spend a lot of time integrating themselves into a particular workflow. And of course, they're personally invested in the sense that they're creating their art with it. And they love their art. And they love the software that facilitates their art. And if they get rewarded for it by releasing it and then putting it out into the world, then they love it even more. And it almost doesn't matter which one they pick because each application, there's definitely 5 or 6 proven pro applications that can all deliver high quality results. So there's really no reason for anyone not to pick one other than the fact that they like the workflow and they like the way it interacts with their creativity. So I must say in my own world, like I still do use the same software that I started with when I was 19. I've added tons of other things in the mix. I've become an expert at pretty much every application there is, but I'm still a subscriber to the original software that I had when I was 19. And I've grown up with it. It was this basic thing. And now it's this giant mega app and it grew with me.
So what makes you loyal? And I understand this from many producers. They're loyal to their 1 or 2 production tools or digital audio workstations. Why did you kind of align on one, and how do you stay loyal to that one?
Sure. Well, I think that, there's a couple of things. I think when someone goes to try a piece of software out for the first time, they can download it. Very often, these companies are very smart. They know that the first one that you try and just get comfortable with, unless there's a good reason not to, the chances are you're just going to keep rolling with that software unless someone can come up with a good reason for you not to. And so they're very clever about including free versions, or let's say, or light versions in with other purchases that you might have for a studio. And they've been doing this for forever, for years. And they know to get to the customer early. They know that the earlier that I can get integrated into the workflow, and the more loyal that I'm going to be. But that's only part of the equation. The other part of it is certain workflows work really well for certain kinds of music. And if you're using the right one, you can generally get better results. And what's also happened is the leverage of the internet. Like those 12, 13-year-old kids using, say, FL Studio, which is a software for making beats that really hacked, let's say, the making beats, made it really easy to do that. Wasn't necessarily considered pro by anybody who would be professionally in the industry. It got embraced by a bunch of kids. A bunch of kids make beats and with it. And then 10 years later, say 2010, 2013, you see this explosion of trap beats and EDM everywhere. And if you go in making you type in to YouTube making beats with FL Studio, you will see billions and billions of hits of people using that software at every skill level you can imagine. Beginners, intermediate, and full-on superstars, all sharing their experience, sharing their techniques, sharing their tips and tricks. I mean, people in SaaS think like a community is like a message board. That's not a community. That's a community, right? Like billions of people providing social proof and enablement.
So you had mentioned a key term a couple of times in your response there, workflow. And my understanding of workflow in music production is pretty critical. It takes oftentimes more than one sitting to develop a song, let alone an album, let alone multiple albums. So, with regard to software usage, what is most important for end users around kind of getting in that workflow and making it work well for them?
Right. Well, there's a couple things, right? Let's just start. There's two aspects of it here. There's workflow, meaning my flow of work through a piece of software, and so the design of the software, in other words. And then there is the flow, my psychological state that I'm experiencing. Okay, so let's start with both those things. I'll start with, say, the psychological state. So flow is basically when we're in the zone, right? And maybe we could be in that zone with other things, like if you're writing a blog post and somehow you got really into it and a few hours go by and you realize you've written most of what you intended. At other times, maybe you can't write a sentence, you delete every single sentence you write and you're grinding. But on this particular day, you're flying, one idea gets followed by another idea, gets followed by another idea, gets followed by another idea. And you turn around, this thing is pretty much written itself. When you're playing sports, playing basketball, there's those days where you just can't miss. You make all your foul shots, you make all your 3-pointers, and what do you keep doing when you got someone like that on the court? You just keep passing him the ball, right? And until he starts missing. So I think this is that when you're creating something, no, you don't create a whole song or a whole symphony or a whole thing in one sitting, but you create the nucleus of that rough draft in that first sitting. And it's very crucial to be able to move with velocity. Let me ask you something, like, if you, like, I don't know, if you can pick any album, like do you have a favorite album or a favorite artist, favorite anything that you could point to? Your favorite song?
Let's say, for me, one of the top, I guess, artist producers would be Above and Beyond.
Okay. So
Above and Beyond,
those
or
guys
Andy
have
Moore.
made a lot of EDM trance tracks, right? And would you figure that when they go to make a track, it's like a 1 step forwards, 3 steps backwards, indecisive process? Or do you think it's more like, at this point of their career, it's like Tom Brady in the Super Bowl marching down the field with 2 minutes left? It's going in the end zone. They know what they're doing. Which one do you think it would more closely resemble?
From my perspective, in just being any professional, I feel like you have a really good idea of what you want to achieve and how to get there, but there's still, even at any stage of your career, it's still that one step forward, two steps back, one step forward, two steps back iteration.
Right.
What are your thoughts?
Well, I think that, I think you want to be able to move with velocity when you work, right? And that's where the experience comes in. The more experience you have, the more deliberate practice you've put in on something, the more velocity you can move with, the more you trust your own decisions, the more that you can just say, I can trust my gut. But that is informed by years of practical experience and deliberate practice.
That's right.
That process gets easier and easier and easier. And
you have your approach down. You have the methodology down, or, your proven, tried and true kind of activities. You're right.
Right. And look, like there's an art to being able to get out of your own way. Okay. Like, this is nothing to do with software design. Sometimes it's just squarely the person in front of the software that matters. Okay. Like, and what I mean by getting out of your own way is, do I have a thought process or a mindset that allows me to finish things? Because what happens with a lot of people, like the things that take you out of a state of flow are second guessing yourself, saying, if you start asking yourself, what's wrong with this? Why am I not getting, why does this not sound right? Why is this, doesn't feel right? Why? You're probably not finishing something that day. If you're collaborating with someone and they say, yeah, you know what? I don't like that. And they don't have any ideas to make it better. Yeah, that's a session killer right there. That's an idea stopper when people do that. So there are a lot of things that ideas can die on, and that is the big separator between people who succeed in music and succeed in things that are creative or have to be have creative output in any way. Is that it sounds like this is a very Seth Godin kind of idea, but the people who win in this arena ship, and the people who don't they don't ship. They don't,
right.
Like their ideas just stay as a loop in the sequencer, and they never get fleshed out to be a finished song, and they never get released, and they don't have enough output to interact with the market, make adjustments, and iteratively improve.
So with one of these DAW software tools, or perhaps something else, what are the impediments of users becoming power users? So going back to that example, you had mentioned some of these pros, they have their process down, their workflow, their tried and true methodology, but it takes time to get there. What are your thoughts on users really having those roadblocks of not becoming a power user?
Right. Well, look, I think we all know a few power users with everything. Those are the guys that we ask to fix our computer when something's messed up with it, right? Like, and it's and thank goodness, probably in the customer success world, like there's always one amazing power user guy in every organization who jumps on everything, wants the latest of everything. But most people are not that guy or girl, right? Most people aren't. If I could relay a story that from my personal story, I joined Steinberg which is the software that Hans Zimmer uses for his music scores. I was a software clinician for them in the early 2000s, and by that point, I'd already had a few records out on EDM labels, and I knew how to do what I knew how to do. And I thought I was pretty good, right? But my boss sat me down before he was going to send me on a promotional tour to trade shows and various music stores and so on. And he sat me down and said, listen, I had to fire the last guy that I sent out here to do this because he didn't know something that he was being asked. And he so he just kind of made something up, and I heard about it. So if I hear you doing that, I'm going to have to fire you. I don't want to fire you, so don't do that. And I'm like, okay. So clearly I didn't want to be in that situation. I didn't want to have to be in front of all kinds of people and not know what I'm talking about. So in that 3-week period, I just floored it and tried to learn as much as I possibly can.
Mm-hmm.
And so I realized that in that moment that I had the motivation to do so. And, most people aren't challenged to do that. I think that the truth is that people can do a lot more than they think they can. I'm certainly able to do a lot more than I think they can. I wouldn't have become an expert if I wasn't forced to. I would just have done what I needed to do to get by, because that's what everybody does. And that's a harsh thing to say, but when you think about it, it's kind of true. You have to have a reason to become a power user. You have to have some internal motivation to become a power user. Awareness is another issue. I mean, there could be some really cool things in music software. There were things in my software I didn't even know were there. I'm sure that people who use SaaS applications, there's all kinds of things that your customers have no idea that are there, right? That if they did know, they would probably put it to good use, but they don't know. And so maybe they haven't had something challenging them. They haven't had someone challenge them. They haven't had a situation that is demanding them they figure this out. And then there's just a bandwidth issue, right? Like today, I mean, if someone's knee deep in their email all day long, they're on Zoom meetings all day long, it takes time and investment to undergo the process to become a power user. So it doesn't just happen, and it doesn't happen through osmosis, but it does happen through doing. We learn software through doing. People have to do it. And when you are, let's just say you went on to LinkedIn Learning and you learned something and you gained some knowledge and you took a little multiple choice test. The good news is you gain some knowledge. The bad news is that the clock is ticking. You're going to lose that knowledge unless you go and apply it somewhere and actually do something.
The other day, I posted something on LinkedIn around adoption. I was giving this a lot of thought of what are some of the impediments for software adoption. And I feel like you just touched on a lot of them, a lot of the topics that we had talked about around bandwidth and simply not understanding the functionality or not understanding the functionality as it relates to your situation or your desired outcome. So, if you have these like lower adoption rates for any software, do you have any recommendations or tips or tricks of ways that you can tie that to an outcome and basically get people to use the software more effectively?
That there's a lot to unpack in that question, but let me just start with some basics here. Right. There's that idea that sometimes gets floated about as somehow adoption isn't tied to outcomes, and that flies in the face of experiential learning theory. So experiential learning theory is clearly on the side of people learn through doing, end of story. No, there's no ifs, ands, and buts about it. And like I said earlier, if you don't use it, you lose it. So think about it this. Just think for a second how we go to get good at something. And it doesn't have to be, it could be music lessons, it could be golf lessons. In fact, let's take golf. I don't golf. So if I went onto a golf course tomorrow, well, I wouldn't be going on a golf course, but if I did, I would suck. And if
you and me both,
right?
We'd be in the same. We could be in the same force.
And I embarrassed myself in front of my friends, so I took some golfing lessons. So I'm taking some golfing lessons. I went with an instructor. He's going to go, well, where'd you learn to swing like that? Here, swing like this. And I'm like, okay. He's like, why don't you go over to the driving range and then practice what I showed you? And maybe I'll go to the driving range. Maybe I go to the putting green, and then I link up back with my friends and we have another golf game. And hopefully I've been able to integrate the coaching that I got and the practice that I did, the deliberate practice that I did. And now hopefully I can expect an improvement in my results. I think that is how we get good at things. That's how if you want to be a better skier, you got to ski more. If you want to be a better basketball player, you got to dribble and shoot more. There is just no way around it. And this is the cycle of how we get good at something. So I would say from a customer success point of view, that underlines the challenge that you have, because you have this onboarding, let's say, right? And this is maybe, everyone talks about the importance of the onboarding. Well, duh, because this is the chance that you have to do the things that we're just talking about, right? You have a chance to coach. You have a chance to observe what the customer is actually doing, give feedback, and you can hold their hand a little bit, and you can see, and they can have a chance to go use it, come back to you, and you have a tight feedback loop. I think what happens over the broader roadmap portion of it is that, well, ask yourself this, like, out of all the interactions you have with your customer, right, all the touch points that you have with the customer, how many of those facilitate skill development in the way that I just outlined?
My sense is that we get sucked into making the additional sale, the upsell, the, hey, truly, are you successful in a way that's going to make me as the company more money? Rather than, you know what, we're just going to focus on skill development. We're going to focus on something that there's no tangible outcome aside from you learning a different thing today.
Right.
Is that your experience too?
Well, it's hard to prioritize these things, right? Like, it's perfectly understandable that these things don't get prioritized as much as they should.
Mm-hmm.
But when we just talked about the idea of a power user and all the impediments to become a power user, well, that's just a single person, right? And then you throw into the mix the fact that you have a customer's organization. So not just one person has to become a power user. Ideally, you would want everybody to be a power user, right? And
that's right.
And not just it doesn't matter if your internal champion at your company is a ninja at your software. It matters that the people that use your software in whatever role they are, who going through a learning and skill development process with it. And that is the tricky part, like being able to scale these sorts of efforts in a customer education strategy. It doesn't just happen. It has to be part of a deliberate process to ensure that people in a customer's organization have the requisite skills and motivation and the why and the wherewithal to develop all this stuff.
I like your example they used a few minutes ago around customer success serving as a coach, like a golf coach or a music coach or whatever it may be, in that they have this kind of in-depth knowledge of the product. They have the overarching journey of where the end user may need to go, and they enable the tools to help the end user get there. Similar, like a piano teacher or coach understands the piano journey to get you from, me to above and beyond,
right.
And really enables the different tools to make that journey successful. Is that how you see it as well?
I definitely, well, someone's got to do it, right?
Yeah.
And I think that would just naturally fall to the customer success people. I think that I guess that what makes it challenging is that customer success people also have so many other responsibilities that I think sometimes these things they fall by the wayside, or they don't get as much extension on it as they could. Customer education is definitely a not really well understood thing, even at this stage, I think. I mean, they understand what you talk to customer education people. There's a lot of things that they know companies should do, but a lot of times, depending on where they are in their trajectory on things, like they may not have a very robust customer education strategy. Like, let's just say, like, if I go to HubSpot, HubSpot's got a great strategy. Like with HubSpot Academy, I don't have to know anything about anything, but I can go take a certification. I can kind of download the software and try it out. I can Google it and find out lots of information. But sometimes, so there's lots of ways for me to kind of learn that software. But a lot of companies, like if someone tells me about a SaaS company and I go to their website, there's no resources. I go to YouTube, there's like a video from 4 years ago with some cheesy music on it. I'm like, what is this? Like, I don't, or they say, call email for demo. Well, now, okay, I wasn't looking to start a formal
Right.
sales process, just to have a look
Yeah.
at something on a lark. So I think there's some impediments there in terms of companies understanding what's really required to have a robust customer education strategy. I think there are customer education experts who could really flesh that out better than I could, on a enterprise level. But I think the ones that I
Yeah.
have talked to express that isn't given enough emphasis for sure.
Yeah, that exact same thing happened to me the other day. I saw a link to click on a customer metrics report, and I did. And the second I signed up, I was getting texts and emails and phone calls, and then it's like, reach out and talk to us. And I said, whoa, I just want to look at the report. I'm sure you're a great company. I will talk to you in due time, but right now, let me focus on the report, not buying more stuff. And maybe it works for some. For me, it was a little over the top.
Right.
So, Morgan, last question today, and this has been fantastic conversation. We've touched on sports, we've touched on music, we've touched on customer experience, all things that are interest and hobbies of mine. In terms of kind of tying it together, in terms of what we aligned on here, how would you recommend to enterprise software organizations to take some of these lessons from your experience in the music industry and apply it to another tool that maybe isn't for musicians?
Sure. No, I definitely think there's some learning aspects here. Number one, you need to focus on what the core skills your customer needs to use your product effectively. And by adoption, it really means, like, to me, adoption means I have internalized the workflow such that I'm on the playing field to achieve results. Like, say if I learn Ableton Live, which deadmau5 uses for his production, I could be an expert in Ableton Live, but that doesn't make me deadmau5, not by a long shot. But it gives me, I'm at least on the playing field to be in that arena. I have a chance. If I am not an expert in Ableton Live, you better believe that deadmau5 is, and he's also an expert on a lot of other things: mixing, mastering, sound design, like the whole gamut, right? Like LED performance stuff. Like, there's a lot of expertise that goes into being that. Knowing the software is only one thing. It's a basic. It's considered a given, right? And so, to me, adoption means immersion. Like, like you're driving a car, you don't think about the car anymore once you've got your license, right? Like, you're just focused on where you're going and what you're doing with it. So that, I think, focusing on the core skills of your customer, that's one thing. Second thing I would say is prioritizing workflow. And what I mean by workflow is I mean, like, certain software I have used definitely some of them have prioritized a very particular way of doing things. Like, some applications have this bloated idea. Here's 7 different ways of doing things. Some to different customer segments is trying to make everybody happy. And you have this bloated app, and it's not clear to a user clicking around what they're supposed to do. And they get stuck. That takes them out of their flow. Whereas some Ableton Live, FL Studio are both a great example of this, where they hacked a process. And what they did was, I'm going to use this process, and then when I do an action, that next action that I'm going to take as a user is very obvious and very apparent and is natural. And I don't necessarily have to stop what I'm doing to go watch a tutorial. I don't have to stop what I'm doing to go read the manual or ask somebody. It's very obvious what I'm supposed to do next. And of course, like, it's all the usual stuff. You need to obviously listen to your customers. You need to listen to the community. I think you need to foster the community. I think, like, music apps have leveraged the collective wisdom of the internet, and by not trying to control the process so much, have just created this huge mass of momentum and collective wisdom and social proof. And I think with regard to instead of having, say, 10 different workflows or 10 different multi-purpose ways of doing something, I think this is where you really have to lead. Yes, you have to listen to your customers, but you also have to lead. You also have to say, we believe this is the right way of doing something. This way, if you adopt this method, is the most likely one to generate the results that you're looking for, right? And secondly, this is the one that this is a process that you're going to enjoy using. One of the things that I think that's really important in terms of being creative, or if you want someone to do something with your software, they have to enjoy the experience, right? It's not always about, yes, like we all want measurable results, but at the same time, you can't just ignore how the sausage is made. Like, you actually have to understand what the experience, decision by decision, that your user experience has when they go to do something. And so that's one thing. And then sometimes it's just time. It's encouragement. People need encouragement to become power users, right? They need the motivation, and they need to feel that what they're doing is of value. Like, it's a lot of those kids learning FL Studio or learning Ableton Live or making beats. Well, they're really grinding away hard because they have a reason. They want to be deadmau5, right? So, does your customer at your company understand what the reason is? Do they have the internal motivation? Has the reason that they should be grinding away learning your software been made clear to them? Is a question that I would ask. Do they enjoy the process? And and is there a reason other than just the final result? Is there some intrinsic thing that they feel that they're doing is worth something, baked into the process? That certainly helps. I mean, I know it's not universally applicable, but it certainly helps if people feel that there's an intrinsically good feeling and quality, that what they're doing is of value. It certainly helps people become more proficient.
That's fantastic. And Morgan, this episode was jam-packed with different lessons learned. I love the examples you use. So thank you very much for taking the time to be here today.
No problem. It was a lot of fun.
Absolutely. We got to do another one of these again real soon.
Anytime.
Like we could have kept going for another hour with some of these questions.
For sure.
Hey, for all the listening audience, thanks again for taking the time to tune in today. If you want to contact myself or Morgan, I'll drop our contact in the box below. If you like this episode, please like it, add a comment, ask a question, engage with us. And also be sure to follow us on YouTube, Spotify, or iTunes. Morgan, thanks again. And thank you all. And we'll see you again next week. Same place, same time, same dimension. Right here. Bye now.